Gears for a moment, have the Israelis presented a credible evacuation plan to the nearly 1.5 million displaced Palestinians sheltering in Rafah, and what would the consequences be?
You notice how the media, how the reporters, how biased they are. Do you notice the adjectives and the nouns that they use, even in asking a question? How she's throwing in the displaced Palestinians. Aside from whether she should even call them Palestinians, let's give her that benefit of a doubt. I discussed those Arabs a few moments ago. Now, at one point did I mention displaced? Notice how she's talking about displaced. Let's go back.
I'll take one.
Thank you, Mr. President. Switching gears for a moment, have the Israelis presented a credible evacuation plan to the nearly 1.5 million displaced Palestinians sheltering in Rafah?
First of all, it's not 1.5 million, it's 1 million. And while that's still a lot of people, it's no different from the amount of people in Judea, Samaria. Number two, 1 million is 33% fewer. Number three, displaced. Number four, they're sheltering. They've been sheltering Hamas for 16 years. They've been sheltering tunnels under the children's bedrooms of their own homes.
And what would the consequences be for Israel if they move ahead with a full-scale ground invasion without clear measures to protect civilians there?
Well, first of all, I've had extensive conversations with the Prime Minister of Israel over the last several days, almost an hour each. And I've made the case, and I feel very strongly about it, that there has to be a temporary ceasefire to get the prisoners out, to get the hostages out.
The United States did not do a ceasefire, temporary or other, when it was at war with ISIS. There was no concern about anything whatsoever. Let the people flee. America was at war with ISIS. And that was under the Obama presidency, when Biden was vice president.
And that is underway. I'm still hopeful that that can be done. And in the meantime, I don't anticipate, I'm hoping that the Israelis will not make any massive land invasion in the meantime. So it's my expectation that's not going to happen. There has to be.
You notice, again, if you're listening carefully, it used to be that we're expecting the Israelis will not engage in aerial bombing because you'll endanger people. We expect you to make ground invasion so you can more carefully target without aerial bombing. Now they're telling Israel, you can't make a massive ground invasion. So what does that leave? Just send in a tank, not massive, just a tank here and a tank there. You become a sitting duck with all of Hamas having evacuated right now to Rafiah. And with the houses, if you don't take the buildings down, shooting RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades from their windows, you're sitting ducks.
They cease fire temporarily to get those hostages. By the way, we're in a situation where there are American hostages. American citizens are being held hostage. It's not just Israelis, it's American hostages as well. And, my hope and expectation is that we'll get this hostage deal. We'll bring the Americans home, and the deal is being negotiated now, and we're going to see where it takes us.
According to Israeli sources who've been very public about it, in all the negotiations to try to get hostages out, the current position of Hamas is as follows. Number one, they demand a complete evacuation of all Israeli soldiers from Gaza, an end to the war, allowing Hamas to remain in power in Gaza. They have given a list of thousands of Hamas and related terrorists in Israeli prisons who in many cases should have been executed, but Israel does not have a death penalty for anyone except for Adolf Eichmann. And so you've got people with blood on their hands, massive murders, and in all the different talks, Hamas has not changed its position. This is what he's talking about, where Hamas keeps coming back with the same demands, and they want Israel meanwhile, to just drop everything, ceasefire, until something breaks in the hostage talks, and Hamas is not changing its position.
I'll take one.
Thank you so much. I only have two questions on Gaza. The first one, yesterday during his remarks with the King of Jordan, the president said over 27,000 Palestinians have been killed in this conflict, and this is the best count that has been made.
Okay, 27,000. First of all, the number comes from Hamas. There's no independent way to count the number of people that have been killed in the Gaza fighting, other than the Hamas-run health ministry. So that's number one. Of the 27,000, Israel says that they have killed approximately 12,000 Hamas terrorists. So when you consider that Hamas's numbers are 27,000, 12,000 are Hamas terrorists, that would leave 15,000 if Hamas is to be believed. And we know that 30%, 3 out of every 10 Hamas rockets that are fired from Gaza into Israel actually land in Gaza. They don't make it there. They're not world-class rocket makers. They do make rockets and missiles, but 30% land on their own people. So you have a kill ratio of approximately 1-to-1. For every one targeted terrorist, target of the war, one civilian is being killed. When the United States went into Iraq, Mosul, places like that, the United States in Afghanistan, in our most successful battles, the United States regularly has reported a kill ratio of 4-to-1. 4 civilians for every target of the battle. Israel, 1-to-1. 4 times more careful, 4 times lower civilian casualty rate.
Made public by Hamas. So do you confirm that this death toll is accurate and can be seen as the official death toll in Gaza? Have you been able to verify this figure?
The president was referring to publicly available data about the total number of casualties. And as he said, too many of that total number, unfortunately, are innocent civilians. He was referring to publicly available data.
And my next question is, when the administration asked Israel to come up with a credible plan to protect civilians before it launches a major offensive in Rafah?
You notice how they all use the term credible, how it becomes like a talking point, that it's not enough for Israel to have a plan. Every other country that does things has a plan. Israel needs to have a credible plan. As if within the question, we may infer that Israel may just be trying to pull a fraud on everybody else.
Does that mean that until now, you think that Israel has been operating with a credible plan to protect civilians in northern Gaza, for example?
Again, we're not, it's hard to, I don't want to get into armchair quarterbacking past operations here. That said, as you saw, when they operated in North Gaza, and then as they started to operate more in communities, they did take steps to allow safe passage for civilians. They dropped leaflets telling them where to go and how to get there. They relied less on air power. So there were efforts. That does not mean, does not excuse any single civilian casualty. They're all tragedies. We don't want to see any. But the Israelis have shown an effort in the past to try to account for the movement and the safety of civilians. And again, as they ponder and consider major operations in Rafah, now with everybody moving down there because of what happened in North Gaza, because of what happened in Khan Yunis, they have a special added burden to make sure that they can provide for their safety and security and sustenance. Sustenance.
Thank you so much. I only have two questions on Gaza. The first one
Get the next
today,
one.
Martin Gropius, the UN aid agency chief, today said in an interview with Sky News that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. He later clarified that it is not on the list of groups that the United Nations can promote of terrorist organizations. What's the word from Washington and from the White House about those comments by Martin Griffin.
Hamas is a terrorist organization. We've said so. It is. It just is. And you don't have to look any further than what they did on the 7th of October to see it in stark terms. And my goodness, take a look at their manifesto, even the one that's so-called watered down in 2017. There's no doubt. They just want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. This is a terrorist organization, pure and simple, period.
Is it possible? I mean, do you find, have you reached out to Griffith to?
I'm not aware that we've done any reaching out, nor do I think we need to. We have made very clear our views of what Hamas is.
Okay, and then I just wanted to follow up, Israel's finance minister has ordered these flour shipments, not to go into Gaza because.
Referring to flour, FLOUR, that's a thing that happens with Israel is concerned that flour that's being sent into Gaza is basically being seized by Hamas and going straight into the tunnels for the purpose primarily of feeding Hamas terrorists living in the tunnels, and is not getting to the civilians anyway.
Martin Griffith, the UN.
Okay, now we'll go on to the next one.
מי חטף אותך?
אזרחים, אנשים,
איך הם נכנסו אלייך הביתה?
פרצו את הדלת. אני רואה ילד בן 17, 18 אולי, מחזיק 3 שמנת מתוקה כזה, שמנת להקצפה, מהמקרר. ואני אומרת לו, זה כאילו, זה מכל מה שהיה בבית, זה מה שבחרתי. נורא מצחיק, זה היה באמת. והוא מראה לי את התיק שלי, הוא אומר לי, מסרי, אז אני אומרת לו, יש בארנק, כאילו.
זה הכל את מול איזה ילד בן 17.
מול איזה ילד בן 17, ואז מגיע האיש הנוסף, המבוגר, עם הסכין, היה לו אפוד.
אפוד וסכין.
סכין גדולה, לא סכין מטבח. סכין, מכובדת.
את יודעת את זה בחיוך, אבל את יודעת שזאת אימה.
כן, זה אימה. לגמרי. אני קפאתי. זאת אומרת, קפאתי. הם לקחו אותי בכוח, תפסו אותי בשתי הידיים, הייתי עם פיג'מה, אז הם כיסו אותי בסדין של המיטה, לקחו את הסדין שלה על המיטה, כיסו אותי. לא. חיפה. כשיצאתי מהבית, דחפתי את נצ'י החוצה וראיתי אנשים עם נשקים, עם רובים, באים לכיווני. ואז הגיע הקלאבקר.
קלאבקר זה?
זה רכב גולף כזה. של הקיבוץ. ודוחפים אותי לקלאבקר ולוקחים אותי לכיוון השער של הכרם ומשם לרצועה. נכנסתי לקלאבקר והורדתי את המשקפיים שלי, כי אמרתי זה הדבר הראשון שעשיתי, אני לא יכולה בלי משקפיים. החזקתי אותם ביד וחיבקתי אותם מתחת הסדין. הם לא ראו שנכנסתי עם משקפיים. ואנחנו יוצאים וכל ההמון, ואז אלפים, כל השדה, זה היה נחיל של אנשים, כל השדה. ויוצאים מהכפר ובאים עלינו, ונשים.
Remember again, these are the innocent Gaza civilians. It wasn't only Hamas that pierced through the border. There were hundreds, even thousands of civilians from Gaza who took part in the murder, the rape, the beheadings, the throwing of babies into ovens. This was the civilians also. And of course, they looted the homes to get whatever property they could take and money and whatnot.
וילדים, בטרקטורון של אבא שלי, עם 2 ילדים, ילד בן 4, 5, לא יותר, ועוד ילד בן 15, 16, שבא לכיווני. ואני רואה שזה הטרקטורון של אבא.
בא לכיוונך מכיוון ח'אן יונס?
כן.
כבר הספיק לעשות דרך אחת ועכשיו הוא חוזר?
ועכשיו הוא חוזר.
ואת נוסעת איתם דרך השדות ועוברים את הגדר.
שם אנחנו מעבירים אותי מהקלאבקר לרכב. רכב שהיה בו דם. ואני יושבת. כן. ואז אנחנו מתחילים לנסוע בתוך ח'אן יונס. ופתאום הם הכניסו לרכב את תמי, מנירוז, תמי מצגר. תמי הייתה פצועה, היו לה, גם הפנים שלה היו חבולות מאוד, וגם הרגליים, הרבה פצעים ברגליים. לקח לי כמה שניות לזהות אותה, ואני, תמי, זותני לי, תמי, די. אנחנו בסדר, חיבקתי אותה.
שואלת אותה על בן הזוג?
אנחנו לא מדברים.
לא מדברים.
אנחנו לא מדברות בינינו.
באותו רגע, אנחנו שתינו בהלם טוטאלי.
ואת מבינה מה הולך לקרות עכשיו.
לא, אני לא מבינה כלום, אני לא מבינה, אני לוקח לי הרבה מאוד זמן להבין מה קרה פה, אני לא מבינה, אני רק נוכחת. ואז אנחנו מגיעות לפתח של המנהרה,
מה זאת אומרת לפתח של המנהרה?
בגדול זה איזשהו מחסן כזה, ויש שם פתח, כאילו בתוך האדמה יש פתח של מנהרה. אני רואה שיש איזשהו משא ומתן בין האנשים שלקחו אותי והכניסו אותי ברכב, מאלה שנהגו באוטו הזה, לבין מי שכאילו מסרו אותי לידיים שלו, שמכרו אותי לידיים שלו, אותי ואת עמי. אני רואה שמתנהל שם משא ומתן. אני יודעת שהם מדברים ביניהם עם הידיים, וככה וככה, ומתנהל משא ומתן. זה דברים שאני מבינה בדיעבד, כי אני לא מבינה אז ש...
You understand what's going on is that civilians, as she's explaining right now, civilians took part, innocent Gaza civilians were among those who took hostages with a plan to bring them into Khan Yunis, which you saw at the beginning before we had to go down and back up, is about 60% deep into Gaza. It's the last major community before Rafiah. And then they've taken these Jews like this lady, Nili Margalit, and they start selling hostages to Hamas. Hamas would like them, didn't get their hands on everyone, so civilians went and saw there was a way to make money, to go and kidnap Israelis, bring them into Gaza, and then sell them to Hamas.
מוכרים אותי לחמאס, שלא האזרחים לקחו אותי, אז באותו הרגע זה...
זאת הפעם האחרונה שתראי אותם.
מי שלקח את החוטפים שלי, כן.
מי שתף אותך?
אזרחים, אנשים.
You heard this past week about this extraordinary piece of news that came out of Israel, that as Israel now has moved into Rafiah, they actually reported, I believe it was last Sunday, we had our class on Sunday, and Sunday night, this miraculous story about how Israeli armed forces had located a spot in Rafiah where hostages were being held, and they actually freed two of the hostages. And I have video here for you. It's just extraordinary. You can't do this without going in with massive ground forces. You can't just come in an Uber, even if you have an Israeli driver, who are very deadly people. You can't just go in an Uber and show up with two people with guns and start freeing hostage. You need an entire complement of tanks, because as you're coming in, Hamas is all over the place. It's built up in Rafiah. It hasn't been bombed yet into rubble. And so they're literally in windows with rocket-propelled grenades, not just rifles like the Old West, but with literally the most anti-tank missiles. And they're shooting at you, and they're killing people. And so you've got to overwhelm them with power, and you've got to bomb from the sky. If you're going to do a ground assault to go into a building to get two people out, you better be bombing all the buildings around there to get everybody else out of those buildings. Go ahead, send them the notes and send them the advanced texts and leaflets and whatever you're doing. But you've got to bomb the heck out of that place so that your own people can get out. Otherwise, all you've done is you've taken two elderly hostages out of a building to be shot to death and blown up the minute they walk out of the building. This is extraordinary video. What?
Not live. Sign back on, just letting you know.
I'm sorry, there was a little disruption. Let me just get back on. Okay. Let's take that off the screen. And okay. Have your hands near your ears. When it hits, it's going to hit. Mind you, as they go into this house where those two hostages were being held, they encounter steel doors that are meant to keep Israelis out in case Israelis ever find the place. So they actually it's not only about shooting rifles to open the door, they've got to throw grenades, they've got to blow open these steel doors. And then the hostages are on the second floor, not underground in this case, but the second floor. It says it's Tiyud Yamam. This is from the body cams or the helmet cams of a special fighting force that actually operates under Israeli police. It was a combined action of the Shin Bet, the Israeli General Security Services, Shirutei Bitachon Klali, the Shin Bet, Shabak, which is like the Israeli FBI, not to be confused with the Mossad, which is like the CIA. And there's a special fighting unit among the Israeli police. Police normally are in charge of domestic law enforcement. Versus in the United States, we're used to the idea that domestic law enforcement is the cops and the army is for foreign affairs. But in a country small like Israel, for those of us who have visited many times, you often see there's police and there's the army and everybody's all over. People are coming back and they're tramping, they're getting a lift on the freeway, on the roadways, highways to and from. So the police have a special unit, the Amam, that coordinated with the Shin Bet to go deep into Gaza, outside, let's say, their geographical comfort level, on this combined operation, which required extraordinary coordination, two units that really don't normally work together. They're under different commands. This is not a reenactment. This is actually what happened. So again, as you realize, when you hear about it the next day in the news, and you hear somebody talking about that we expect the Israelis to take greater precautions and credible plans for protecting civilians, this is what it takes. You're literally watching, not a reenactment. This is what it takes to free two hostages. You've got people shooting at you, and you've got a firefight where you're fighting for your life. Because if you're a moment too slow, then you're going to get killed before you ever get near those hostages. And then the next day, when there are reports that 30 or 50 or 67 people got killed, understand this is what it took to get the hostages. The blue circle shows the rescue forces coming into the building. And so Israel has to bomb the building next door, right? You can't let Arabs sitting there with Hamas shooting at you and throwing grenades and God knows what from the next door buildings. You've got to take out that building. There's no other way to do it if you want your people to get out there alive. This needs to be a little quick. You imagine these two 70 or 80-year-old guys that haven't been able to get exercise and walk, even younger, healthier people who are forced to be immobile for weeks and weeks. They're sitting for 3 months strapped to chairs. Maybe they get to go to relieve themselves, but basically they're strapped to chairs. There's no light. It's black dark outside. They have no idea this is coming. They're sitting there like their minds are on neutral for the last 3 months. And all of a sudden they're told, you know, you got to keep up with us a little bit quick. And you do it. And you heard in the background, they're getting shot at as they leave that building. Okay, on to the next one.
Shalom, friends. Jeremy Gimpel from the Aru Goat Farm. Last night, in the most bold rescue operation in the war to date.
Now, you were with us last Sunday. So you remember last Sunday, we got to meet Javier Milei, the new president of Argentina, and how he visited the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And then he went to Eretz Israel and he was at the Kotel.
The IDF was able to rescue 2 hostages from the heart of Rafiah in the middle of a war zone in an urban area. How were they able to do it? The details are not yet publicized, but with tunnels and booby traps and a war zone all around them, somehow miraculously, the IDF was able to do the impossible. What I want to do though right now is I want to tell you the backstory of what happened right before this amazing rescue operation, connect the dots and tell you something that the media will never share. Right before the rescue operation, the newly elected president of Argentina made his first trip to Israel. And for those of you that don't know, this is the most pro-Israel, pro-Jewish international leader that we have ever seen before. He says he wants to convert to Judaism when he completes his presidency. He says he's a student of the Rebbe, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He says he loves Israel, loves the Bible, believes in God. And when he came to Israel, it was like a media fanfare. He goes to the Western Wall and he's crying in the most heartfelt prayer we've ever seen any international leader ever pray like that. A lot of international leaders come and they'll put a little, note in the wall. You see him crying for his people, crying for Israel. Everywhere he goes, people are singing and dancing. And we're looking at this charismatic leader, and no one really knows what to do with it. Then in the evening, he goes to Yad Vashem, which of course represents the greatest disaster in Jewish history. And he gives a Bible teaching on prophecy of the building of the third temple in Jerusalem and the timeless tale of hope of Rabbi Akiva.
Hay una profecía acerca de la destrucción que relata que un zorro irrumpiría en el lugar más santo. También hay otra profecía que relata que este mismo lugar será reconstruido. Ahora que veo con mis propios ojos cumplirse la primera profecía, me río de alegría y esperanza, ya que de seguro se cumplirá la segunda profecía.
And that night, 2 hostages were rescued. Do you know where those 2 hostages were from? That's right. They were from Argentina.
Is that
More
cool?
than that, there is an ancient text in the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, page 98, that talks about what will be the name of the man who heralds in the era of the coming of Mashiach. What will be his name? And so there are many opinions. One opinion says his name will be Shiloh. One opinion says his name will be Chanina. One says that his name will be Menachem, the one who brings comfort. The last opinion, and I'll put it up on the screen here, it says, and the rabbis say his name will be a leper from the house of the rabbi. And that's obviously the most peculiar of all names. But when you look at the Aramaic and the Hebrew, his name is Chavira, which means white. That's not really a name. And so the interpretation was, oh, it must be the white skin of a leper, so his name will be leper. But what is the name of the president of Argentina? If we look at the Hebrew letters, Javier and Javira, Javier, it's hard to not see that there.
Look, do with this what you want. I thought this is too cool not to share. It's really a thing. That they were from Argentina. The guy came, he was at the Kotel. The guy was there, he's praying at the Kotel, and that night they liberate the guys from Argentina.
I guess you have never heard about the Farhud, the 1941 pogrom against Jews in Iraq, in which...
Now, let me tell you what I'm going to do with this. By my previous plan, I didn't intend, of course, to lose 5 or 10 minutes with that candidate I'm not going to vote for. I don't remember her name. That's good for her. My plan from the outset is this is 20 minutes. And his material is incredible, but he's a little bit boring to listen to. But he has extremely good, valuable material that I found incredibly important to share. So I'm going to break him into two weeks, about 10 minutes today and 10 minutes next week, because it would be hard to listen to him for 20 minutes. You'll see he has a certain sing-song. He's an Israeli from North Africa, and he has a particular sing-song English. But really, really, it is so important to have a good, I couldn't find anything in the web that is as good as this in terms of its comprehensive overview of how Muslims have been ethnic cleansing Jews forever. So about 10 minutes this week and about 10 minutes next week.
Hundreds of Jews were killed. I guess you have never heard the story about Sol Hajoel, a Moroccan Jewish girl, only 17 years old, who was killed for refusing to convert to Islam. I guess you have never heard about the anti-Jewish riots in Aden, Yemen. I could go on, but I'm sure you get a picture. You probably know nothing or next to nothing about this topic, the ethnic cleansing of Jews within Muslim countries. There is this false narrative that, unlike in Europe, Jews enjoyed the same rights as Muslims in Muslim countries, and that until the rise of Zionism, Jews were able to lead peaceful, happy lives in Muslim countries. That is a lie. I mean, it was better for Jews in Muslim countries than in occupied Poland in 1943, but that isn't exactly setting the bar high. The Jews were never seen as equal to Muslims in Muslim countries, not before colonial times and not after, not before the rise of Zionism and not after, not before the State of Israel was established, and definitely not after. Was it all horrible? No, and I will get to that shortly. Some of you are not going to like what I'm about to say and will probably accuse me of Zionist propaganda. So I would like to start off with 2 comments. First of all, let's look at the numbers of Jews in Muslim countries. In the 1940s in Libya, there were 35,000 Jews, and today there are 0. In Egypt, there were 85,000, and today there are 3. In Tunisia, there were 100,000. Today there are 1,500. I could move on to Syria and Lebanon and Iran, but again, you get the picture. All of these Jewish communities have been completely destroyed or almost completely destroyed. And when the numbers are so dramatic as this, it does tell us something. It's not something that should just be ignored. Communities don't just disappear if they are having a great time. In non-Muslim countries like the US, France, and Canada, there were Zionists and Zionist activity, and a large part of these communities said immigration is hard. You only resort to it when the situation is unbearable or when you think that it will soon become unbearable. And my second comment, if you are not convinced by the numbers of Jews I just mentioned, then tell me this. Can you name one minority in any Muslim country that is thriving? From Morocco in the west to Iran in the east, from Turkey in the north to Yemen in the south, the number of Coptic Christians in Egypt is decreasing. Christians in Iraq are disappearing, with 2 million having left in recent years. Iran is the home to many oppressed groups that no one cares about, the Baha'i, the Zoroastrians, the Balak people. I know you've probably never heard of them. Independent women aren't having a good time in Iran either. Then there are the Kurds, a Muslim nation who are fighting for independence, but being oppressed by other Muslims. No one is getting out onto the streets for them, by the way. And there are Hindus who are suffering terribly in all Muslim countries. There used to be millions of Hindus in Muslim countries. They are disappearing. They get zero media coverage. I will soon be making a video about the real oppressed people in the Middle East. But now back to the main topic of this video, the ethnic cleansing of the Jews within Muslim countries. I will start off with the community that suffered the most, the Jews of Yemen. Unlike other Jewish communities, which also enjoyed time of prosperity, Yemenite Jews experienced hardships that was either very bad or catastrophic. They had suffered under Muslim rule for hundreds of years and been exposed to a series of anti-Jewish laws, one of which was that orphan children had to be Muslimized. This was one of the reasons why the Jews of Yemen got engaged and married at a very young age, so that if their parents died, the kid would already be part of another family. This fact also explains why half of the Yemenite Jews had already migrated to Israel before 1948, before the creation of Israel. One of the waves of immigration of Yemenite Jews to Israel took place in 1882, the same year that the first wave of Jews came from Europe in modern times. As an Israeli, I've been accused of colonialism about 400,000 times. Never mind the fact that there has never been a Jewish colonial empire in Europe like that of the British or the French, but most of the Jews in Israel today, and indeed 150 years ago, came from Muslim countries. This shows how wrong, how weak and distorted the argument accusing Israel of colonialism is. When a poor Russian Jew who survives the pogroms comes to Israel, he is a symbol of white colonialism. And when Jews migrate from Yemen in the same year for the same reason, they are completely ignored. In 1947, there were pogroms against Jews in Aden. About 100 Jews were killed, and nobody was held accountable. A year later, 2 Muslim girls drowned in a well in Yemen, and the Jews were blamed. They were arrested and ordered to pay substantial fines. They lived in constant fear and suffered immensely. From 1949 to 1950, all of the Yemenite Jews, about 50,000 people, migrated to Israel. Airplanes were my first love before I found out about girls. And there is a nice little anecdote I like to tell here. Most of the Jews of Yemen, many of whom have never ever seen a car before, were flown to Israel in airplanes. By the way, which company flew the Jews from Yemen to Israel? Air Alaska. I know. Golda Meir wrote in her memoir, Sometimes I drove to the airport to meet the Jews as they landed from Yemen. Once I asked an elderly man, "Have you ever seen an airplane in your life?" And he said, "No." And then I asked, "Weren't you afraid to fly?" And he said, "No. As it says in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, you yourself have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Today, there are no Jews in Yemen. The Jews in Iran have a very long history going back 2,500 years. Although today Iran is the main root of evil in the Middle East, I must say that of the supporters I have in Muslim countries, most of them are from Iran. I hope that the good people of Iran will bring down the cruel Islamic regime. I'm not going to try to summarize the history of Jews in Iran, but there is one short story about the Jews of the city of Mashad. In 1839, many years before the advent of the Zionist movement, there was a blood libel against the Jews. 40 Jews were killed and a few girls were abducted to become Muslim child brides. The community was forced to convert to Islam. For more than 100 years, the Jews kept their identity a secret. They were known in Mashad as the new Muslims and continue to suffer at the hands of their Muslim neighbors. The converted Jews had to open their shops on Saturday to prove that they didn't observe the Shabbat, the Jewish day of rest. So despite opening the doors of their shop, they did their best not to sell anything to the customers. After the Islamic Revolution of 1979, they all fled to Israel. There are no more Jews in Mashhad. From Iran, let's move to the country next door, Iraq. I started this video by talking about the Farhud, and the thumbnail of this video is also taken from the Farhud program. I'm focusing on it for two reasons. The Farhud was the largest pogroms against the Jews in terms of the number of deaths. Terrible things were done to the Jews, and many women were the R word. I have to just stop here and say a word about this, about what's going on. You are not just watching my video, you are watching my video on YouTube. Now, I love YouTube and I love the Americans, but I really need to choose my words very carefully. I have to comply with the YouTube community guidelines, which are basically the YouTube rules. YouTube, stop calling them community guidelines. They have nothing to do with my community, with my subscribers, and they are not guidelines. They are strictly imposed American corporate, Puritan, politically correct rules. If I don't comply with them, YouTube reduces the exposure of this video by about 90%. It has happened to me a number of times in the last few weeks. That is why I'm not saying the word I really want to say, which is what happened. So the R word stands for making love, but without the love and the consent part, which is actually just pure evil and violence. So hundreds of Jewish women were subjected to the R word. The reason I chose this specific photo is that it doesn't show 1 or 10 or even 100 Arabs. You can see hundreds of Arabs armed with knives and cheering on their way to kill Jews. The Arab women were cheering too. There has never been any incident involving gangs of Jews or Israelis storming into an Arab village population and killing Arab children and subjecting Arab women to the R word. Never. Even after the Yom Kippur War or the suicide bombers, never has a Jewish mob done anything like it. Never. The Muslims, on the other hand, have done it, and they are still doing it to Jews and other minorities. In Hebrew, we refer to the Jewish community in Iraq as the Babylonian Jews, as the Jews in Iraq were there from the times of the great empires of the East, more than 1,000 years before the establishment of Islam. So there were 150,000 Babylonian Jews 80 years ago. Today, there are about 4 Jews left in Baghdad. Now, let's say a word about the largest Jewish diaspora in the Muslim world, the Jews of Morocco. My family originally came from Morocco.
And we'll continue with that second part, God willing, next week. I wanted you very much to have this opportunity to start learning about the part that people don't talk about, what the Arabs did to the Jews.
I guess you have never heard
Just-
about our Talmud.
What should happen to the Jews who live in Israel? Should they
Okay, this is from Great Britain.
leave? Yes. Freedom for Palestine.
Start that again.
Israel, should they leave? Yes. Freedom for Palestine. What do you think when you hear the word Zionist?
I think apartheid, sorry to say this, Nazi.
The truth is that Britain and America have started virtually every war in the 20th century, and that includes the First and Second World Wars.
Right.
Every war has been started by them, but
So like, I mean, lots of people think like Germany and Hitler started World War II. Are they just like delusional?
that is, I'll give you one quote to explain that, and that is, history is written by the victors.
So in the UK, Hamas are a proscribed terrorist organization, as you probably know. So that means
One
that
man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Yeah, I mean-
Your or whoever they think that's their side of. I don't think Hamas is a terrorist.
have you heard about a group that's been in the news recently called the Houthis?
Yeah,
What do you think about them?
well done, bravo.
Bravo. I mean, a lot of people at these marches have been chanting Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around. What do you think about
To
that?
them. I admire them immensely.
Do you think they're anti-Semitic?
No,
Have you seen?
what you're misunderstanding is Arabs are Semites, so we cannot be anti-Semitic.
Think they're anti-Semitic?
Why would they be?
Have you seen their flag?
The Yemen flag.
No, the Houthis flag.
What about it?
Is it okay if I show it to you quickly? Is it okay? Thank you very much. So it says, God is great, death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam. How do you interpret that?
Well, with the Houthis and Yemenis in the general sense, that's their perspective of Jews. Like all they've seen is Israelis. They don't know a Jew in London that's over here. That's all they see. That's their perspective. You can try to convince them, but ultimately you might fall into a case of because that's all they've seen. They're a bit one-sided. You can't blame them for saying curse the Jews when they're specifically in our sense it'd be like they're referring to Israelis, but it's just yeah.
That's their sense of Jewishness.
What should happen to the Jews who live in Israel? Should they leave? Yes, freedom for Palestine. But if you want your own state and your own land, you can't forcibly occupy other people's land, kill them, take their land, build resources on their land and profit from their land. So what do you think about the Jews living there? I mean, where should they go? That's none of my business.
It's not a coincidence. They're all like, you look at the Hollywood, you look at like all like the mainstream, like Paramount, Sky, Fox, everything. It's just like, you look at who top level executive people are. Once you like uncover the truth and you find out, oh, it's not a coincidence anymore. It feels very not planned, but like
What exactly is planned?
just like there's some like greater agenda perhaps or something like that is being pushed or
In what way? I've kind of lost track of where we are.
Yeah.
So what's the great agenda that's being pushed?
just like I guess they're using
Who's they?
the Zionists basically. They're using like a mainstream Hollywood music industry just to like push this certain face in regards to like how good Israel Zionism is.
If we look at the details, the details don't really add up. If you look at them with a fine-tooth comb, a lot of the killings took place in Treblinka, and the amount of but the truth is, it's not worth quibbling about whether 1 million died, 2 million died, 3 million died. It was one of the
People say 6 million, right?
okay.
What should happen to the Jews who live in Israel? Should they leave? What should happen to the Jews who live in Israel? Should they?
Bounce it on.
לשאול למה החלטת
Okay, here we go.
להתייעץ עם גנץ בעד
For this, I will translate. He just held this press conference last night. And there's no better way to get Israel's side of what's going on. And nothing more interesting than when the Israeli media jump all over him. The Israeli media are extreme leftist, except for Channel 14, the TV station, but channels 11, 12, and 13 are extreme leftist. Ma'ariv, Yediot Achronot, just as in America, Times of Israel and Jewish Telegraphic Agency. It's just a one-sided universe there, and they jump on him. So he was holding a press conference. We began earlier today with Biden and John Kirby talking, and he was basically asked about this. Remember, background also, he and his coalition were elected 1 year ago, November of 2022. And so in November, they marked 1 year in office, and they were elected to a 4-year term, basically. So they have 3 more years to go. But because Israel is sort of like a parliamentary system of government, you can always bring down the government. Unlike in America, where someone gets elected and now he's there for 4 years, even if the feeling of the country changes dramatically and people feel, well, if I could do it now, I would vote the other way. A person has 4 years to do it or not do it. In Israel, as with the Brits, at any given time, the government could be taken down. If enough people in the majority coalition back off. And that happened in Britain not long ago with Boris Johnson, when it came out that he's busy telling everybody else not to go to parties during COVID. And then it turned out he was holding all these parties at 10 Downing Street, and he brought down, his government came down. So the Israeli left is already resumed amid wartime, having mass demonstrations in places like Tel Aviv, demanding that the government step down in the middle of the war. They want new elections right now in the middle of the war. That's the Israeli left. So we held a press conference, and I'll be pausing regularly because I'm not as good as those United Nations people who do it, but I'm pretty good. Here we go. So first of all, they want to ask him, you've got a unity government right now, where you've got your Lakewood coalition on the right and your natural political partners. And at the same time, you have Benny Gantz of the opposition, who has agreed to sit with your government in coalition for the duration of the war. To create a national unity government gives Israel greater strength when people say Netanyahu is doing something wrong, that his chief opponent can get up and say, I'm with him on this. The country is all together. So first of all, they're asking, have you not been consulting with your partners, Gantz and Eisenkot?
איזנקוט לפני קבלת ההחלטה שלא לשלוח נציגים למשא ומתן על עסקת חטופים.
As I had mentioned at the beginning of today's class, Israel, Netanyahu has decided, he had sent a team into Cairo for the next round of negotiations with Hamas over the release of hostages in return for whatever it's going to cost Israel. And when they found out that Hamas had not at all changed their positions and are still demanding thousands upon thousands of Hamas murderers to be released, plus Israel to get out of Gaza and end the war and leave Hamas in power. So Netanyahu, as the prime minister, said to his negotiating team, get out of Cairo, come back home. When they change their tune, we can talk about it. Meanwhile, that's it for talks for now. So the first question is, did you consult with your two war cabinet partners before calling back the negotiators?
ואם תוכל להסביר את השיקולים שלך להחלטה.
Can you explain, you were in the middle of give and take, and then you called everybody home. Why?
שקיבלנו שאחרי שישראל הלכה כברת דרך במשא ומתן, ולא קיבלנו שום דבר, אלא דרישות הזויות.
We came for give and take, and all we got were delusional demands.
החמאס, דרישות על הר הבית, דרישות להפסיק את המלחמה ולהשאיר.
They're demanding that we stop the war. They're demanding that we give them the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
חמאס על כנו, דרישות לצאת מעזה, דרישות לשחרר אלפי מרצחים.
They're demanding that we give over thousands upon thousands of murderers. And we'd come for give and take. We did not come for give and give.
הדרישות האלה הזויות, לא קיבלנו שום שינוי מהן, אבל בכל זאת החלטתי לשלוח לבקשת הנשיא ביידן. נעניתי לבקשה הזאת, לשלוח את
Biden asked me to send a negotiating team and at least listen to them. So I did Biden a favor. I responded and I sent a negotiating team and I told them, sit and listen.
משלחת לקהיר, ואמרתי להם, וזה היה מוסכם, לא דבר שסיכמנו אותו בקבינט המלחמה, שבו ותשמעו. הם ישבו ושמעו, ולא היה שום שינוי. לא...
So they sat and they listened, and there was not the slightest change from the last negotiating session.
רציתי להגיד לא מילימטר, לא ננומטר.
Not only did Hamas not change, I was about to say they didn't change 1 millimeter, they didn't even change 1 nanometer.
אפילו לא ננומטר שינוי מהדרישה הזאת, הם חזרו הנה, וכמובן לא היה שום שינוי בהנחיה, אין לכם מה לנסוע לשם עד שנראה שינוי. אני חושב שזו הדרך הנכונה לנהל את המשא ומתן.
I believe this is the right way to negotiate with these people. I brought them home. When Hamas comes up with something different, we can go back.
זה היה בהתאם למדיניות קבינט המלחמה.
And this, by the way, has been agreed by the whole war cabinet, including the opposition in the unity government.
ואני אגיד יותר מזה, אני מנהל משא ומתן, לא מתן ומתן. כי במתן ומתן לא נקבל כלום.
By the way, it's interesting to watch a press conference in Israel compared to what goes on in America. In America, particularly during the previous presidential administration, there was absolute chaos in the White House press room. If you remember, all the reporters would jump up at once and start yelling and screaming their questions, and Jim Acosta would be the loudest, and you would hear the prime minister stands, a person calls on reporters one by one, and each question begins with Adoni Rosh HaMemshala, my Lord Prime Minister. It's just they hate him. It's not like they respect it. They hate his guts. But even so, there's a certain dignity that's conducted.
ראש הממשלה, בהמשך לעימות שלך עם הנשיא ביידן, מעבר לחילופי הדברים ביניכם, השר בן גביר אמר לוול סטריט ג'ורנל שאם טראמפ היה בשלטון הכל היה אחרת.
Okay, I'm from Channel 12, and as far as your relationship with Biden, the word is that it's getting more and more confrontational, and one of your cabinet ministers told the Wall Street Journal that if Trump would be president right now, things would be very different because Trump's policies towards Iran were very different.
גם הבן שלך אומר בריאיון שהשינוי...
Also, your son was interviewed the other day, and your son also said things were better under Trump than under Biden.
ביחס של ביידן לאיראן, זה המקור לכל הצרות במזרח התיכון. האם אתה מסכים עם בן גביר ועם הבן?
So do you agree with your cabinet minister who spoke to the Journal, and do you agree with your son?
שלך.
כל אחד רשאי להביע דעתו, אבל המדיניות שלנו נקבעת באופן מסודר בקבינט.
Look, everybody in this country is entitled to express his opinion, but the way we conduct foreign policy is in an organized manner.
מלחמה.
We have a war cabinet,
וגם בקבינט הרחב.
and we have a broader cabinet.
עם הנשיא ארצות הברית ועם הממשל האמריקני, אנחנו מעריכים את התמיכה
And we work with the President of the United States and his government. We're very grateful for all the support they've given us.
אני גם חושב שהגענו להרבה הסכמות, אבל יש דברים שאנחנו לא מסכימים.
And very often we reach a lot of agreements together, and every so often we don't agree.
המדיניות שלי הרבה יותר פשוטה. זה לא להתערב בפוליטיקה האמריקנית, אבל...
My political way of handling this is very simple. I'm not going to get involved in American politics of Trump and Biden.
כן לעמוד על הדרישות של המדינה שלנו.
Rather, I'm going to focus on the particular demands of our country.
אני אומר כן, כשצריך, אני אומר לא.
Whenever I can give in, I'll say yes. And when our country has certain needs that I can't give in, I'll say no.
ערוץ 13, מתן חודרוב.
אדוני ראש הממשלה, שבוע טוב. ב-1 בינואר אמרת בסיעת הליכוד, אנחנו...
This guy is from Channel 13, and he asks an economics question. Israel was just downgraded a notch by Moody's. And so he's asking, since over the years you've taken responsibility and claimed it's because of you that Israel's economy has improved and has become a world leader in high tech, are you willing now to tell the country that it's your fault that the country was downgraded economically?
יכולים להרשות לעצמנו שהגירעון יעלה, לא יקרה כלום, סוף ציטוט. לפני שבוע, לראשונה בהיסטוריה, מודי'ס הורידה את דירוג האשראי של ישראל, שישפיע על כולנו, כשלצד המלחמה עצמה, כלכלני החברה מציינים גם את הגירעון הגדול וסוגיות שקשורות ליום שאחרי המלחמה. שאלתי היא, האם אתה, שזוקף לזכותך בצדק את העלאות הדירוג של ישראל בעשור האחרון, מוכן לקחת אחריות גם לכישלון הכלכלי הזה? האם אתה מתכוון לפתוח את תקציב 2024 כדי להפנים את ההערות או לשקול את...
So, since you took credit for all the good, are you willing now to accept the blame for messing up the economy and causing Moody's to downgrade Israel?
החלפת שר האוצר על מנת ששאר סוכנויות האשראי...
And will you also fire your minister of the treasury, your finance minister, because of this?
S&P ופיץ' לא ילכו בעקבותיה של מודי'ס והצטרפו לכדור השלג. תודה.
אני לא חושב בכלל שיש פה כישלון כלכלי, נתוני...
Number one, I don't agree that we have an economic failure.
המקרו של ישראל הם טובים מאוד ביחס...
If you look at all the data and all the critical data regarding our economy is extremely strong.
מדינה שנמצאת במלחמה הם טובים מאוד מאוד.
We are a country right now in the middle of a war. And as countries in the middle of a war go, our economy is incredibly strong.
והורדת דירוג האשראי לא באה בגלל סיבות כלכליות, היא באה בראש ובראשונה, כי אנחנו נתונים במלחמה.
And the downgrade has nothing to do with a structural problem in the economy. It's because we're in the fourth month of a war.
וכשאנחנו נצא מהמלחמה וננצח במלחמה, דירוג האשראי יעלה מיד. אני מוכן...
As soon as the war is over, we will win, and I guarantee we will win, and the credit rating will go back up.
תראה על זה. עכשיו אני יכול להגיד, גם התחזית השלילית, הכל נובע מהמלחמה. שיראו שאנחנו מנצחים, ואולי לא כולם מבינים שאנחנו הולכים לנצח, ושהניצחון הוא...
When people realize that we're winning this war, it's to our advantage. And when people don't realize that we're winning the war, it gives a different impression.
בהישג יד, אתם תראו את הדירוג חוזר בחזרה. אגב, הכסף החכם כבר מבין את זה.
And by the way, smart money, if you look at the markets, people now are using this as an opportunity to invest in Israel low, anticipating that it's going to shoot back up.
עכשיו אנחנו רואים שיממה או שתי יממות אחרי דירוג האשראי הזה, הורדת דירוג האשראי, היה ביקוש שאנחנו הנפקנו אגרות חוב של ממשלת ישראל, והיה אם איננו טועה שיא, אני לא יודע אם שיא של...
אשמח לשמוע את התגובה שלך להצעה של השר מיקי זוהר, לקבוע מראש שהבחירות יוקדמו ויתקיימו מיד אחרי המלחמה, ומה זה למעשה אומר את העובדה שהקולות האלה נשמעים לא מהאופוזיציה, אלא מתוך הליכוד, אנשים שקרובים אליך.
What are your feelings about politicians now holding press conferences saying that there should be new elections, including some people in your own Likud party who are your followers saying we should go to new elections?
הבחירות יש להם תאריך, זה עוד כמה שנים, ואני לא מציע לעסוק בזה בתוך המלחמה.
Look, first of all, the next elections are scheduled in 3 years. And I don't recommend getting involved right now in worrying about elections in the middle of a war.
הדבר האחרון שאנחנו צריכים עכשיו זה בחירות ועיסוק בבחירות, משום שזה...
The last thing in the world we need right now is a country getting involved in the middle of a divisive election campaign where everybody starts attacking each other.
מיד יפלג אותנו. ואם יש דבר אחד שהחמאס מחכה לו, שנלך באמת למאבק פוליטי כזה, אנחנו צריכים כרגע אחדות, זה לא אמירה, זה לא ספיד.
We need unity right now. We don't need to be fighting each other in an election, and that's not a spin.
זה לא איזו אמירה שאני אומר מן השפה אל החוץ. אנחנו צריכים להתאחד. יש לנו רבע מהכוח הלוחם המאורגן של החמאס לחסל, ואנחנו נחסל אותו. אנחנו מטטים את השטח לגבי המחבלים האחרים, אנחנו מפרקים להם את התשתית.
We're destroying the Hamas infrastructure. We're destroying them above ground. We're destroying them below ground. We've wiped out a half to 3/4 of Hamas already.
קרקעית, אנחנו החזרנו למעלה ממחצית חטופינו, ואנחנו נחזיר גם את השאר.
We brought home more than half of our hostages between negotiations and otherwise.
אנחנו צריכים להתאחד כרגע על המאמץ העיקרי, ולא לעסוק בפוליטיקה. אני מציע לכולם להתאזר בסבלנות.
We should be focused on unity, and I don't want to get involved in politics like that.
אדוני ראש הממשלה, אתם אומרים לתושבי שדרות שכבר אפשר לחזור מחודש מרץ, אבל אתה לא יוצא בקולך ואומר להם, חברים, בטוח...
I'm going to jump because of time.
בצפון אנחנו עובדים עליה.
יותר מסובכת, הן בגלל מספר הפליטים שנמצאים שם וגם...
Okay, last question, I believe this guy.
כניסה קרקעית לרפיח.
And I don't know if your Hebrew air is good enough, but you could tell this guy's an American the way he says his race.
שבוע טוב, אדוני ראש הממשלה, אתה אמרת...
Did you hear how he said Rosh? Only an American says Rosh like that, because I know I can't say it the way the Israelis do. It's the R that gives it away. Adoni Rosh HaMemshala, it's so American.
יותר מפעם אחת וגם הערב, שאין ניצחון בלי כניסה קרקעית לרפיח. עם כל שבוע שחולף, כניסה לרפיח נראה יותר מסובכת, הן בגלל מספר הפליטים שנמצאים שם וגם בגלל ההתנגדות הגוברת בעולם. האם הייתה תוכנית בתחילת הכניסה הקרקעית להיכנס לרפיח במקביל לעיר עזה, ואם כן, למה זה לא אושר? תודה.
So, are you ready to go into Rafiah? Because that's going to be a big mess. It's highly populated and you've got all those people there. And was it part of your plan eventually to end up in Rafiah?
קודם כל, אני לא אכנס לתוכניות שלנו, אבל אני חושב
Well, first of all, I'm not going to tell you what our military plans were or are.
בניגוד למה שאתה אומר, היכולת שלנו להיכנס לרפיח, גם מבחינה צבאית וגם מבחינת פינוי אוכלוסייה, היא רק הוכחה כמאוד ריאלית. הרי בהתחלה, לפני שנכנסנו לכניסה הקרקעית, אתה זוכר שאמרו, אי אפשר להיכנס,
Look, if you remember when we began this war, people said you're not going to be able to go into Khan Yunis. You're not going to be able to go into Gaza City. No matter where, they're going to stand up and they're going to massacre all the soldiers. And, well, we've cut through each one.
תפגשו התנגדות עצומה, לא תוכלו להיכנס מעל הקרקע, לא תתכנסו מתחת לקרקע.
You'll never be able to get into the tunnels. You'll never be able to knock the tunnels out of business.
הלוחמים שלנו נמצאים בתוך המחילות. אנחנו מחסלים את הגדודים הללו, מפרקים אותם.
Our guys are doing very well. They're wiping out Hamas. They're tearing apart their infrastructure.
מקום שצה"ל נכנס, קודם כל צה"ל יכול להגיע לכל מקום ברצועת עזה. הוא יכול להגיע גם לרפיח.
Right now, Sahel can get anywhere they want in Gaza, including Rafiah, and everywhere they go, they win.
ובאשר לפינוי אוכלוסייה, אמרו לנו גם כן, לאן תפנו את האוכלוסייה?
And as far as what's going to happen with the Arab population now in Rafiah, where everybody says there's nowhere for them to go, and what are you going to do about it? They'll find a place to go. We'll make a place. There's a lot of room in Gaza. They don't tell you in the media how much of that area is just completely open, vacant spot. It is not anything nearly as compressed as people make it sound. There's a lot of open area.
אנחנו בקרוב נסיים את הפעולה שלנו בח'אן יונס.
We're just about done in Khan Yunis.
המקום לפינוי יהיה.
Where are we going to direct the civilians in Rafiah? There'll be places to send them, just as each previous attacking area, we've been able to send people out and create safe spaces for them for new areas.
מקום מצפון לרפיח, ולפני נחל עזה, הרבה מקום ברצועה, נדמה לי שזה 60.
There's a lot of place. 60% of the Ritzua, of the Gaza Strip, is actually not occupied. There's nobody there. It's open area.
60% יותר, 65% משטח הרצועה, הרבה מקום, אבל צריך לדאוג לעשות זאת בצורה מסודרת. זו הדירקטיבה שנתתי לצה"ל.
But it has to be done in an organized way. So I've sent a directive to the IDF that they are to start setting up evacuation centers.
גם עומד בזה ומכין את זה. נכון, יש התנגדות רבה בעולם, אבל אני מסביר, זה בדיוק הרגע שבו צריך להתייצב ולהגיד, אנחנו לא...
And look, I know around the world, everybody's opposed to what we're trying to do. So I try to explain to them.
נעשה חצי עבודה ולא נעשה 3/4 עבודה.
We didn't come to do half the job. And we didn't come to do 3/4 of the job. We've come to finish this job.
אני אמרתי למנהיגים בעולם, שנלחמו למשל בדאעש, כן?
I said to world leaders, when you guys were at war with ISIS,
מה הייתם משאירים 3/4 מהכוח, רבע מהכוח של דאעש,
So what did you do? You left 1/4 of ISIS in place
עם טריטוריה שלו.
with its own territory?
בסדר? לא הסכמתי עם דבר כזה, בעולם לא הייתם מסכימים עם
Nobody agreed to that. Nobody in the world would agree to that.
דבר כזה. וזה במרחק אלפי קילומטרים מהבירות שלכם.
And you wouldn't allow 1/4 of ISIS to remain in place, even though they were thousands of kilometers away from your cities.
איך אתם רוצים שאנחנו נסכים להשאיר רבע מהשטח, מהכוח של חמאס, עומד על תילו?
So how can you expect us to leave 1/4 of Hamas right in our border?
טריטוריה מוגדרת, לא ניתן דבר כזה.
Not going to let it
אני
happen.
חושב שאנשים מבינים את זה. אבל כולם רוצים להגיע להסדר עם מתווה נוסף של שחרור, גם אני רוצה. אם נשיג את זה, מה טוב. אבל גם אם נשיג את זה.
Look, I know a lot of people would like us to stop fighting now and negotiate a hostage deal. Well, let me tell you, even if we accomplish a hostage deal, we're still going to go into Rafiah.
לא יכול להגיד לך, לפי העמדות ההזויות של החמאס, זה לא נראה כל כך קרוב, אבל גם אם נשיג את זה, אנחנו ניכנס לרפיח. אין תחליף לניצחון המוחלט.
There is absolutely no alternative but complete victory this time around.
אין דרך להשיג את הניצחון המוחלט בלי לחסל את הגדודים האלה ברפיח, ואנחנו נעשה את זה.
There is absolutely no other way but to destroy all the Hamas battalions presently based in Rafiah, and we're going to do it.
Of a connection between the shooter and Lakewood.
Not sure whether you heard about the shooting that took place this past week at Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church in Texas. So it's like, what does Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church in Texas have to do with Jews? Some crazy nut of a woman goes into church with a 7-year-old son, decides to try to shoot up the church.
Jeremy Rogowski joins us now. What did you and your team find out today, Jeremy?
Yeah, Len, we poured through court documents and the shooter's social media accounts and learned Genesee Moreno went to Lakewood Church at one time, as did her mother. And at one point, Moreno's ex-mother-in-law says she approached Lakewood staff with questions about her daughter-in-law's behavior.
Turns out that this maniac who tried to shoot up Lakewood Church had been married to a Jew in Mexico, and the Jew's mother, i.e. the mother-in-law of the maniac, is a non-Jewish Reformed converted rabbi.
On Instagram in 2020, Genesee Moreno posted confirmation of a recent donation she made to Lakewood Church, writing, "I will honor and bless my church." Nearly 4 years later, police say she brought her 7-year-old son and an AR-15 rifle to Lakewood and began firing.
We want to know the motive, how she got the weapon, why she did this. We're not there yet.
Officials remain tight-lipped about a motive, but these court documents reveal Moreno had been involved in a contentious divorce and custody battle for her son. Her ex-mother-in-law, Rabbi Wally Carranza, intervened in the case, claiming Moreno had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, had been investigated 4 times by CPS, and intentionally harmed her child.
There's always a Jewish connection.
Twice. Court records show Carranza says she sought assistance from the pastoral staff at Joel Osteen's church to understand Moreno's behavior. In 2022, Moreno won custody of her son after her Jewish ex-mother-in-law never appeared in court. Fast forward nearly 2 years later, authorities found anti-Semitic writings at Moreno's Conroe home.
We do believe that there was a familial dispute that has taken place between her ex-husband and her ex-husband's family, and some of those individuals are Jewish. So we believe that might possibly be where all of this stems from.
Now, the 36-year-old Moreno had a criminal history dating back to 2005, with charges ranging from theft to forgery, assault, and unlawful carrying of a weapon. Court records showed she used another name, Jeffrey Escalante, in some of those cases. Lennon.
Thanks, Brian.
And they found on her rifle that was confiscated at the time they killed her last week, they found written on the rifle the words "Free Palestine." All right, just about done here.
Sometimes I imagine what I write today for my dear.
This past week, of course, was the Super Bowl, and without any comment, I leave it up to you to decide whether this was a good way to spend $7 million for 30 seconds.
Martin. I remind people that all hate thrives on one thing: silence. The people who will change the nation are those who speak out, who refuse to be bystanders, who raise their voices against injustice. When we stand up to silence, we stand up to all hate.
All right, $7 million. And I invite you to just look on the internet and read comments about that ad. How many people saw that the thing said stand up to Jewish hate and understood that it means that this is Israel attacking Gaza and stand up to that Jewish hate?